Hey there. If you're someone who believes in the magic of unexpected connections and those rare moments that change our lives forever, make sure to subscribe to Real Life Chronicles, where ordinary days transform into extraordinary journeys. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alex. I'm 32, recently laid off from my tech job, living in a modest rental home in a sleepy suburb of Portland, Oregon. It's a kind of neighborhood where most people know each other by sight, but not necessarily by name. It's a kind where garage doors close quickly after cars pull in, where neighborhood block parties are suggested, but never actually planned. It was early June, unusually warm for the Pacific Northwest, and I was sitting on my porch steps drinking lukewarm coffee, scrolling through job listings that all seemed to require either more experience than I had or less than I was willing to admit to. My bank account was dwindling, and my apartment lease had just gone up by 15%. Not exactly the career trajectory I had mapped out when I graduated with my computer science degree 10 years ago. That's when I noticed Mrs. Novacat leased. That's what the mail sometimes accidentally delivered to my house called her struggling with her ancient lawnmower across the street. She was a slender woman, with silver-streaked dark hair always pulled back in a practical bun, whose garden was the envy of the neighborhood, but whose lawn had recently begun to look a bit neglected. I'd seen her around for the 3 years I'd lived here, exchanging polite nods and occasional comments about the weather, but never having an actual conversation. The lawnmower sputtered dramatically, coughed up a plume of gray smoke, and died with a pathetic whine. Mrs. Novak stood there, hands on her hips, looking down at it like it had personally betrayed her. Something about the defeat in her posture made me stand up. Need some help with that? I called out, immediately wondering if I was overstepping. In this neighborhood, people minded their own business. It was practically an unwritten rule. She looked up, squinting against the sun. "Oh no, I couldn't trouble you," she said automatically. The kind of response people give when they absolutely need help, but have spent too many years not asking for it. I was already crossing the street, grateful for the distraction from my job search despair. "I'm pretty good with small engines," I lied. The truth was, I could barely change my own oil, but YouTube tutorials had gotten me through tougher challenges. "It's been acting up all spring," she said as I approached. "My husband used to take care of all this. The way she said, used to told me everything I needed to know." "I'm Alex, by the way," I said, kneeling down to examine the ancient machine. "I've lived across the street for a few years now." "Alina Novak," she replied, offering a gardening gloved hand that was surprisingly strong when I shook it. 3 years and 2 months, to be exact. "I noticed when you moved in. The Robinson family had that house for almost 20 years before." I was a bit taken aback. "You've got a good memory." "When you've lived in one place for 30 years, you notice the patterns," she said with a small smile. "Like how you get your mail around 2:15 every day and always check it on your way into the house." I wasn't sure whether to be impressed or slightly concerned about how closely she'd been observing my habits, but there was something in the way she said it, not creepy, just matter of fact, that made me think she probably knew the patterns. Of everyone on our street, the lawnmower was indeed dead beyond my amateur abilities. After 15 minutes of tinkering and pretending I knew what I was doing, I had to admit defeat. "I think this might need actual professional help," I said, wiping grease on my jeans, or possibly last rites. Alina Novak laughed, a surprisingly youthful sound. "That's what the repair shop said last time. Quoted me $300, which is more than a new one would cost." She sighed. "But I hate to give up on things just because they're old." Something about the way she said it made me think she wasn't just talking about the lawnmower. "Tell you what," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "I have a perfectly good electric mower that I could bring over. I could mow it for you today if you'd like." The words were out before I could analyze why I'd said them. Maybe it was the job rejection email I'd gotten that morning. Maybe it was the way she stood in her yard, looking simultaneously determined and defeated. Or maybe it was just that I had absolutely nothing better to do with my Thursday afternoon. "I couldn't ask you to do that," she protested, but there was a hint of relief in her voice. "You didn't ask," I offered, I pointed out. "Besides, my mower needs the exercise. It's just sitting in my garage getting rusty." 20 minutes later, I was pushing my relatively new electric mower across her lawn, creating satisfying stripes of light and dark green. Alina had disappeared inside, probably to escape the heat, and I found myself enjoying the simple, physical task. There was something deeply satisfying about the immediate result, seeing order emerge from chaos with each pass of the mower. Her yard was larger than it looked from the street, with several mature oak trees that complicated my neat pattern and made me work up a proper sweat. I was just finishing the back corner when the screen door creaked open, and Alina emerged with 2 glasses of what looked like iced tea. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You must be parched," she said, holding one out to me. "It's homemade, secret family recipe." I shut off the mower and accepted the glass gratefully. The tea was cold and sweet, with something I couldn't quite identify, maybe mint, maybe something more exotic. "This is delicious," I said after a long drink. "What's in it?" "If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret anymore," she replied with a slight smile. She gestured to a pair of Adirondack chairs positioned under one of the oak trees. "Take a break. You've earned it." I sat down, realizing how tired I actually was. Not just from the lawn, but from the weeks of job searching, rejection, emails, and mounting anxiety about my finances. "So," Alina said, settling into the chair beside me, "what's a young man with your education doing mowing an old woman's lawn on a Thursday afternoon? Shouldn't you be at work in some glass tower downtown?" I nearly choked on my tea. "How did you, the University of Washington sticker on your car window?" "The hours you keep, the way you dress when you leave for interviews," she explained, counting off on her fingers. "I'm observant, not psychic." I laughed, oddly refreshed by her directness. "Well, your powers of observation are impressive, but slightly outdated. I was laid off 6 weeks ago. Budget cuts." I tried to keep my tone light, but some bitterness crept in. "Ah," she nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the pattern change. You used to leave at 7:45 a.m. sharp. Now you're home all day, but you dress up and leave occasionally, returning looking progressively more deflated." "Are you sure you weren't a private investigator in a previous life?" I asked, only half joking. She smiled, looking out across her yard. "No, just a teacher for 32 years. Elementary school. You learn to notice everything or risk chaos. Plus," she added more softly, "when you live alone, you pay more attention to the world outside your windows." There was something in that statement, a simple truth about loneliness, that hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I really looked at Alina Novak, not just as the older neighbor lady with the nice garden, but as a person with a story. She was probably in her early 50s, with fine lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled. She wore simple clothes jeans and a blue button-up, shirt rolled at the sleeves, but there was an elegance to how she carried herself. Her wedding ring still gleamed on her left hand. "How long have you been on your own?" I asked, immediately, wondering if the question was too personal. 3 years in September," she replied without hesitation. "Richard had a heart attack while working in this very yard." She gestured toward a rose garden along the fence. He was trimming those climbing roses when it happened. I was grading papers inside. "Sorry," I said, the words feeling painfully inadequate. She nodded in acknowledgement. "He was 58, too young," everyone said, as if there's an age where it becomes acceptable to lose your partner. She took a sip of her tea. "The first year, everyone checks on you. The second year, they expect you to be moving on. The third year, they've mostly forgotten you were ever part of a pair." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just listened. "Anyway," she continued, straightening in her chair, "enough about my sad story. Tell me about your job hunt. What kind of work do you do?" For the next hour, we sat under that oak tree talking. I told her about my specialized skills in software development that were somehow simultaneously in demand and impossible to get hired for. She told me about retiring from teaching just before the pandemic hit, and how the timing had left her feeling disconnected from her former colleagues. I learned that she spoke 3 languages fluently, traveled to 27 countries, and made her own pasta from scratch every Sunday. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, no awkward pauses or forced politeness. I finished mowing the lawn in another 20 minutes. Alina puttered around her garden, pulling weeds and deadheading flowers. When I was done, I rolled the mower back to the front yard, feeling oddly accomplished. "What do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for her back pocket. "Absolutely nothing," I said firmly. "It was my pleasure." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between skepticism and appreciation. "Nobody does something for nothing. These days, Alex. Consider it neighborly goodwill," I insisted. Besides, that iced tea was payment enough. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, her head tilted slightly to one side. Then, with a decisive nod, she said the words that would somehow change the course of both our lives. "Stay for dinner," she said, her voice casual but her eyes serious. "I'm tired of eating alone." The statement hung in the air between us, simple but heavy with meaning. I could feel it was more than just a dinner invitation. It was an admission, a reaching out, a small act of courage from someone who had perhaps grown used to solitude. I hesitated, mentally checking a calendar that held nothing. But more job applications and Netflix. I'd like that. A smile spread across her face, not wide or dramatic, but genuine. Good. I was making lasagna anyway, and it's impossible to make a small portion. 6 o'clock? "I'll bring wine," I offered. Red, she specified. And none of that $2 Chuck nonsense. "If you're going to drink wine with an Italian woman's lasagna, it had better be decent," I laughed. "Yes, ma'am." As I wheeled my mower back across the street, I felt lighter somehow. The job rejection from that morning seemed less important. The mounting bills on my kitchen counter, less threatening. I had dinner plans, actual human, interaction that didn't involve a screen or discussing my career trajectory and transferable skills. I showered off the grass clippings and sweat, changed into clean clothes, and then spent an embarrassing amount of time at the local wine shop trying to select something that wouldn't reveal my complete ignorance about wine. The shop owner eventually took pity on me and recommended a Montepulciano that wouldn't offend an Italian grandmother and wouldn't empty my increasingly tight budget. At 5:58 p.m., I stood on Elena's porch, wine in hand, feeling strangely nervous. This wasn't a date, obviously, but it had been so long since. I'd been invited into someone's home that I'd almost forgotten the social protocol. Do I bring the wine? Already opened? No, that would be weird. Should I have brought flowers too? Would that have made it seem like a date? My overthinking was interrupted when the door swung open. "Right on time," Alina said approvingly. "Come in." I stepped into a home that felt like stepping back in time. Not in a dusty museum way, but in a warm, lived-in way that modern homes often lack. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not just with books, but with photographs, small sculptures, and mementos that I imagined each held a story. The furniture was solid wood, not the disposable particle board stuff that filled my rental. It smelled amazing garlic tomatoes, herbs that made my stomach immediately remind me that lunch had been a sad peanut butter sandwich. "Your home is beautiful," I said, meaning it. 30 years of collecting and curating," she replied. "Richard used to say, I never met a bookshelf I didn't want to adopt." There was fondness in her voice when she mentioned him, not just sadness. Me through to a dining room where the table was already set for two. Not with fancy china, but with clearly well-loved dishes that looked like they'd hosted hundreds of meals. A small vase of freshly cut flowers sat in the center. "You can open that," she said, nodding to the wine as she disappeared into the kitchen. "Glasses are in the cabinet to your right." I found the glasses and poured the wine, feeling oddly at home, despite never having been in this house before. Alina returned, carrying a dish of lasagna that made my mouth water instantly. "It needs a few minutes to set," she cautioned, setting it on a trivet. "In the meantime, tell me about your worst job interview ever." That unexpected question broke any remaining tension. I found myself recounting the disaster of my attempt to appear knowledgeable about a programming language I'd only read about the night before. By the time I finished the story, we were both laughing. And Alina was serving huge squares of the most authentic-looking lasagna I'd ever seen outside of a restaurant. "This is incredible," I said after the first bite. not even caring that I was speaking with my mouth half full. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," she replied. She came from a small town outside of Naples. She believed that recipes were meant to be felt, not read. I spent every Sunday from age 6 to 16 in her kitchen, learning to cook by feel and smell and taste. She took a sip of wine, nodding approvingly at my selection.
Not bad.
Richard was the wine expert in our household. I'm still learning. "What did Richard do?" I asked, genuinely curious about the man who had shared her life. "He was an architect," she said, specialized in restoring historic buildings. He saw beauty in structures everyone else had given up on. She gestured around the dining room. "This house was his project when we first bought it. It was nearly condemned." I looked around with new appreciation. "He did an amazing job. He was patient," she said, "with buildings and with people. Said both just needed the right kind of attention to reveal their best selves." She smiled at a memory I couldn't see. "Enough about my past. Tell me about your family." The conversation flowed as easily as the wine. I told her about my parents in Michigan, my sister in California, how we drifted into the kind of relationship maintained through group texts and obligatory holiday calls. She told me about her brother in Florida who called faithfully every Sunday evening, and her nieces and nephews who visited occasionally but were busy with their own growing families. Before I knew it, 3 hours had passed. The lasagna was gone, the wine bottle empty, and Alina was serving coffee and small, delicate cookies that she called my grandmother's secret weapon. "Secret weapon for what?" asked, biting into. "One, it was buttery and melted almost instantly, leaving a hint of almond. For making sure guests never wanted to leave," she replied with a wink. She said good hospitality was equal parts good food and good timing, knowing exactly when to offer something so delicious that people forgot they were planning to go home. I laughed. "What's working? These are incredible." "The recipe dies with me," she said seriously, but her eyes twinkled. "My nieces have tried to get it out of me for years." As the evening wound down, I found myself reluctant to leave. Not just because of the food or the break from my lonely apartment, but because I genuinely enjoyed Elena's company. She was insightful, funny, and refreshingly direct in a world where everyone seemed to communicate through filters and carefully crafted personas. "I should probably let you get some rest," I finally said, glancing at the clock that somehow now read 9:45 p.m. "Yes, these old bones need their sleep," she said with a hint of sarcasm. "Though I should warn you that old doesn't mean what you probably think it means. I still run 3 miles every morning at 5:30. Now I feel even worse about my lifestyle choices." I groaned, standing up. "Thank you for dinner. It was the best meal I've had in, probably since I moved here." "You're welcome anytime," she said, walking me to the door. Then she added, more quietly, "I mean that. Gets too quiet here sometimes." At the door, she surprised me by handing me a container. "Leftovers," she explained. "There's enough for lunch tomorrow."
Ow.
"You don't have to," I insist. She cut me off. "I told you lasagna is impossible to make in small portions. Besides," she added with a small smile, "it gives me an excuse to get my container back, which means you'll have to visit again." I smiled, recognizing the gentle manipulation for what it was. "How about I mow your lawn again next week, since your mower is out of commission?" "That seems like an uneven exchange," she mused. "My container of leftovers for a full lawn mowing. Throw in another glass of that iced tea, and we'll call it even." Her eyes crinkled with amusement. "Deal?" As I walked back across the street to my house, container of lasagna in hand, I felt a strange sense of having stumbled into something important. The conversation with Alina had awakened something in me, a reminder that connection could happen in unexpected places. when richer people. That sometimes the simple act of seeing someone really seeing them was the greatest gift you could offer. I glanced back at her house, where lights were now being turned off one by one. Just yesterday, it had been simply the house with the nice garden across the street. Now, it was Elena's house. Elena with her homemade pasta and her secret cookie recipe and her stories about a husband who saw potential in broken things. Back in my own kitchen, I put the lasagna in the refrigerator and noticed a small piece of paper taped to the container. On it, in elegant handwriting, was a phone number and a note, in case you need to cancel lawn duty, or in case you just want to talk. Sometimes it helps to have someone who listens. I looked at it for a long moment, then programmed the number into my phone. I wasn't sure where this unexpected friendship was heading, but for the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to something. Not a job interview or a paycheck, but simply the chance to share another meal with someone who saw me as more than just the unemployed guy across the street. As I got ready for bed that night, I realized with some surprise that I hadn't checked my email for job listings or rejections in over 6 hours, the longest stretch since being laid off. Instead of the usual heaviness of worry and inadequacy, I felt something lighter, something like hope. And all because I'd offered to mow a lawn on a summer afternoon when I had nothing better to do. The following Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of my typical anxiety-induced insomnia that had become my unwelcome companion since losing my job, but because I had actually set an alarm. I had a purpose today. Mowing Elena's lawn again, as promised. Strangely, I was looking forward to it. The simple physical task felt like a welcome relief from the endless digital job hunt that had consumed my life. Plus, there was something undeniably satisfying about creating visible, immediate results, transforming an overgrown lawn into neat, orderly rows. In my professional life as a software developer, results were often abstract, invisible to the untrained eye. Here was work where progress was unmistakable. I made coffee and checked my email out of habit. 3 more rejection letters waited in my inbox, each one dressed up in different corporate language that all translated to the same message: thanks but no thanks. One particularly stung a position I was perfectly qualified for, where I'd made it through 3 rounds of interviews, only to be told they'd gone with a candidate whose experience better aligned with their current needs. Before, those emails would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and fear. Today, I closed my laptop with a determined snap. The rejections still hurt, but somehow they didn't define my entire day anymore. I had somewhere to be, someone expecting me. At precisely 9 a.m., I wheeled my electric mower across the street. Elena was already in her garden, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and canvas gloves. I would be like kneeling beside a flower bed, bursting with colors I couldn't name. "Good morning," I called out. "Lawn service reporting for duty?" She looked up, shielding, her eyes against the morning sun, right on schedule. "I appreciate punctuality." "Former Boy Scout," I said with a mock salute. "Always prepared and chronically on time." "A useful trait," she replied, standing and brushing soil from her knees. Unlike my tendency to lose track of time while gardening, I once missed a parent-teacher conference because I was repotting orchids. I smiled, already setting up the mower. "What are you planting?" "Heirloom tomatoes," she said, gesturing to several small plants. "My grandmother's seeds passed down through generations. They taste nothing like those watery imposters from the supermarket." "I wouldn't know the difference," I admitted. Gardening expertise extends to occasionally remembering to water the lone succulent on my windowsill.
That's how it starts,"
she said with surprising seriousness. One plant leads to another, and before you know it, you're ordering rare seed, catalogs, and arguing with strangers online about optimal soil pH. I laughed. "Sounds like a slippery slope. It's the best kind," she replied with a smile. "The iced tea will be waiting when you're done." I started on the lawn while Alina returned to her gardening. We worked in comfortable silence, each focused on our tasks, but aware of the other's presence. There was something oddly domestic about it, this unspoken coordination. Every so often, I'd glance over and catch her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, not quite curiosity, not quite assessment, but something thoughtful. An hour later, with the lawn looking pristine, I shut off the mower. Almost immediately, Alina appeared with 2 glasses of iced tea and that same knowing smile. "Perfect timing," I said, accepting the cold glass gratefully. "Teacher's intuition," she replied. 32 years of knowing exactly when students are about to finish their work. We sat in the same chairs under the oak tree, the morning sun filtering through the leaves to create dappled patterns on the grass. "So," she said after a moment, "any news on the job front?" I grimaced. 3 more rejections this morning. At this point, I'm considering a career change to professional lawn care. "You're certainly qualified based on empirical evidence," she said, gesturing to her yard. "Though I suspect your talents are worth more than neighborhood lawns." "Try telling that to the tech companies that keep rejecting me," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Alina was quiet for a moment, studying me over the rim of her glass. "What exactly do you do, Alex, beyond the vague tech job description?" So I told her about my specialization in UX design and front-end development, about the startup I'd worked for that had promised to revolutionize educational software but had burned through its funding too quickly. I explained coding languages and user interfaces and the satisfaction of building something that made technology more accessible to people. To my surprise, she followed along, asking intelligent questions that revealed she was actually listening, not just being polite. "So you're a translator," she said when I finished. "What do you mean?" "You translate between machines and humans," she explained. "You make technology speak human. That's not so different from teaching, you know. Both require understanding how people think and learn." I'd never thought of it that way before. "I guess you're right. You considered looking beyond traditional tech companies?" she asked. "Schools, nonprofits, government agencies, they all need people who can make technology accessible, especially for those who didn't grow up with smartphones in their hands. The pay is usually significantly lower," I said, stating the obvious obstacle. "Yes," she agreed. "But so is the competition, often. And purpose can sometimes compensate for pay, at least temporarily." I nodded, considering her words. That the idea had never occurred to me, but I'd been so focused on replacing my exact previous position that I hadn't seriously explored alternatives. "Actually," Alina continued, reaching for her phone, "I might know someone who could use your skills." "Let me make a call later. You don't have to do that," I protested. "Of course I don't have to," she said matter-of-factly. "I want to. That's how community works, Alex. We help each other. Besides," she added with a hint of mischief, "I'm being entirely self-serving. If you get a job, I'll have to hire an actual lawn service, which will cost me far more than occasional lasagna ingredients." I laughed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Not because I thought her connection would necessarily pan out, but because for the first time in weeks, someone besides me was invested in my job search. I wasn't carrying the burden alone. "Now," she said, setting down her empty glass, "I believe. I promised you lunch in exchange for your landscaping services. I hope you like frittata. I have no idea what that is, but if you made it, I'm sure it's delicious." "It's an Italian egg dish," she explained, leading me toward the house. "My grandmother called it refrigerator surprise because you use whatever vegetables you happen to have on hand." I sighed. Elena's kitchen was a cook's paradise, not in a modern, Instagram-worthy way, but in a functional, well-loved way. Copper pots hung from a rack. The gas stove was clearly professional grade, and every surface held some essential tool or ingredient. A small television in the corner was turned to a cooking show with the volume low. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a stool at the counter. "Watch and learn." For the next 30 minutes, I observed as Alina moved around her kitchen with practiced efficiency. She chopped vegetables with impressive speed, whisked eggs with one hand while reaching for herbs with the other, slid the mixture into a well-seasoned cast-iron pan without spilling a drop, all while maintaining a running commentary on proper technique. "The secret is to let the egg set at the edges before you put it in the oven," she explained. "And never, ever use pre-grated cheese." The anti-caking agents ruined the melt. I nodded, fascinated by her expertise and confidence. In my world of technology, I moved with this same assured precision. It was humbling and refreshing to witness mastery in a completely different domain. The resulting frittata was, as I had predicted, delicious, fluffy, flavorful, and nothing like the sad omelets I occasionally made for myself. We ate at her small kitchen table, the conversation flowing naturally from cooking to books to travel. I've always wanted to visit Italy, I admitted. See where my coding heroes created the Renaissance. Lena raised an eyebrow. The Renaissance predates coding by several centuries, I believe. Not at all, I argued playfully. Da Vinci was the original programmer, he just used different tools. His notebooks are basically elaborate pseudocode for inventions. David was a perfect execution of visual design principles. They were creating user experiences before we had a name for it. Lena laughed, a full, genuine sound that filled the kitchen. I've never heard it described that way, but you might. Beyond to something. The way they solved problems, iterated on designs, documented their process. Perhaps you tech people didn't invent everything after all. Don't tell Silicon Valley, I stage whispered. They think they invented sliced bread. This easy? Banter continued through lunch, and before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. I helped Alina clean up, despite her protests. Cooking and cleaning are a package deal in my book, I insisted, drying a plate. My mom would disown me if I left dishes for my host. Your mother raised you well, Alina observed, handing me another dish. Tell me about your family. So I did about my parents who still lived in the same Michigan house where I grew up, about my older sister who had followed the expected path with her husband and 2 kids in suburban California, about how I was seen as the family wild card for moving to the Pacific Northwest for a tech job. They mean well, I concluded, but they don't really understand what I do. My dad still asks if I can fix his printer, as if all technology is basically the same thing. Alina smiled knowingly. Parents have a way of reducing us to simplified versions of ourselves. My mother still sends me teaching supplies, even though I've been retired for 3 years. Do you miss it? I asked. Teaching. She considered the question carefully, looking out the window toward her garden. I miss the moments of connection when a struggling student finally grasps a concept that light in their eyes. One miss. The community, the sense of purpose. She turned back to me. But I don't miss the politics, the endless paperwork, the feeling of swimming upstream against a system that doesn't always value education. I nodded, understanding completely. That's how I feel about tech sometimes. I love the creative process, the problem solving, the aha moments when code finally works. But the industry itself can be exhausting, the constant need to prove yourself. The ridiculous interview processes, the emphasis on youth and novelty over experience. Perhaps that's true of most careers, Alina mused. We fall in love with the work itself, then have to make peace with the structures built around it. As the afternoon stretched on, Alina showed me her garden in detail. Naming each plant and sharing its story, this rose bush came from her wedding bouquet, that herb. Garden was planted the year her husband died as a form of therapy. These tulips were from bulbs her students had given her when she retired. Gardens are living photo albums, she explained, gently touching a flowering vine. Each plant marks a time, a memory, a connection. I found myself unexpectedly moved by this perspective. My own life felt so transient by comparison, and hinted. Apartments, disposable furniture, digital photos that rarely got printed. There was something powerful about Elena's physical anchoring of memories in living things. Maybe you could teach me, I heard myself saying. About gardening, I mean. Got that patch of dirt behind my rental that's just growing weeds? Her face brightened. I'd love to. Everyone should grow something at least once in their life. It changes your relationship with time, with patience. I'm not known for my patience, I admitted. All the more reason, she replied. The plants won't grow faster just because you check your email every 5 minutes. I laughed, recognizing the gentle dig at my constant phone-checking habit, touché. As the afternoon began to wane, I reluctantly mentioned that I should get going. I had promised myself I'd submit at least 3 more job applications today. Before you go, Alina said, disappearing into another room. She returned with a business card that she handed to me. My friend Diantha, one I mentioned earlier. She runs the technology department at the community college. Call her on Monday, tell her I sent you. Took the card, touched by her thoughtfulness. Thank you, really. Don't thank me yet, she warned. Diane is notoriously picky, but she's also fair, and they desperately need someone who can speak both tech and human. At the door, Alina handed me another container, this time filled with the remaining frittata. For tomorrow's breakfast, she explained. And yes, this is another transparent ploy to ensure the return of my container. I smiled. Your manipulation tactics are showing, Mrs. Novak. She corrected. And they're only manipulation. Tactics if they're subtle. I prefer to call this clear communication of expectations. Noted, I said with a laugh. Same time next Saturday for lawn duty? Actually, she said, I was thinking of hosting a small dinner party next Friday. Nothing fancy, just a few friends. You'd be welcome to join if you'd like. What? The invitation caught me off guard. It was one thing to share casual meals and conversation, one-on-one, quite another to be invited into her broader social circle. I wouldn't want to intrude, I said hesitantly. Nonsense, she replied firmly. It's my dinner party. I decide who belongs. Besides, she added with a small smile, everyone will be curious about the young man who's been mowing my lawn. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? I said, imagining the speculation that must be circulating among her friends. Excellent. Friday at 7 o'clock. Bring that wine you chose last time. It was actually quite good. Walking back to my house, I felt an unexpected lightness. The day had unfolded nothing like I'd planned, yet somehow exactly as I needed. I had a lead for a potential job, plans for Friday night that didn't involve Netflix, and leftover frittata for tomorrow's breakfast. As I opened my front door, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Alina, forgot to mention where. Something nice on Friday, nothing fancy, but Margaret always dresses up, and I don't want you to feel underdressed. I smiled at the thoughtfulness of the warning, then realized I'd never given Alina my number, as if anticipating my confusion. A second text followed. Got your number from your lawn service business card. Don't worry, I'm not a stalker, just observant. I laughed out loud, remembering the business cards I'd printed when briefly considering a side hustle, mowing lawns cards I'd stuck in a few neighborhood mailboxes, including Elena's, apparently. Message received, I texted back. I'll dust off my formal lawn mowing attire. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, smartass, this is why you're good company. That night, as I worked on job applications, I found myself approaching the task with renewed energy. The conversation with Alina had shifted something in my perspective. Instead of seeing each application as a potential rejection, I began to view them as possibilities, doors that might open onto unexpected paths. I even followed Elena's suggestion and expanded my search beyond traditional tech companies, looking at educational institutions, nonprofits, and public agencies. The salaries were indeed lower, but some of the missions resonated with me in ways my previous jobs never had. Sunday morning, I ate Elena's frittata while sitting on my small back porch, surveying the patch of weeds and dirt she had offered to help me transform. In the early morning light, I could almost visualize it turbs in one corner. Maybe tomatoes against the fence where they'd get the most sun, flowers to attract bees and butterflies. On impulse, I took a photo of the sad little yard and texted it to Alina with the caption, Patient 0 awaiting garden intervention. Prognosis. Her reply came minutes later. Terminal case of neglect, but not beyond saving. Treatment plan. Soil amendment, strategic planting, and regular care. Side effects may include dirt, under fingernails, and unexpected satisfaction. I smiled, saved the text, finished my breakfast with a strange new feeling taking root alongside the plans for tomatoes and herbs hope. Not just for my garden or job prospects, but for this unexpected friendship that had sprouted from a simple offer to mow a lawn. Monday morning brought an unexpected flurry of activity. I called Diane, Elena's contact at the community college, expecting to leave a message. Instead, she answered directly, asked me a series of pointed questions about my experience, and then Said I have a 1:0 window at 2 p.m. today. Can you come in? Surprised but ready, I agreed. Then I spent the next 3 hours researching the college's online presence, preparing questions, and trying to remember where I'd stored my least wrinkled dress shirt. By 1:30, I was parked in the college's visitor lot, mentally reviewing my portfolio. The campus was modest but well-maintained, with students lounging on grassy areas between modern buildings. The interview with Diane, a known-sense woman in her 60s with short, gray hair and piercing eyes, was unlike any I'd experienced. In the tech industry, no abstract algorithm puzzles, no hypothetical scenarios, just direct questions about my experience and approaches to real problems they were facing. Our student portal is a nightmare, Diane explained bluntly, which was designed by administrators who never actually use it. Students hate it, faculty avoid it, and support staff waste hours helping people navigate it. What's the biggest pain point? I asked, already mentally sketching potential solutions. Everything, she said with feeling, but especially the registration process and grade access. It's like they deliberately chose the least intuitive approach. We spent the next 45 minutes discussing specific issues and potential approaches. I drew rough interface sketches on a notepad, asked about user needs, and explained how I would prioritize improvements. At the end, Diane leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Alina said you were smart, but she didn't mention you were practical. That's refreshing. Most designers want to rebuild everything from scratch. Sometimes that's necessary, I acknowledge, but often the best approach is evolution, not revolution. Users need familiarity while things improve. She nodded approvingly. The position is part-time, initially 24 hours a week. The pay is exactly what you'd expect from public education, modest. But there's full benefits, even for part-time, and potential to expand to full-time within 6 months. I'm interested, I said honestly, surprising myself with how true it was. The salary would be tight, but it would extend my runway while I continued looking for full-time work. And more importantly, it was meaningful work that matched my skills. Good, she said briskly. I'll need to interview 2 other candidates. Policy requires it, but I'll be in touch by Wednesday. I left the campus feeling energized in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Even if this particular opportunity didn't pan out, it had reminded me why I entered this field in the first place, to solve real problems for real people. That evening I texted Alina, interview complete. Your friend Diane is intimidating, but impressive. Her response came quickly. That's exactly how my students described me. How did it go? Surprisingly well. Thank you for the connection. I owe you one. Nonsense. Just bring a good dessert on Friday. Nothing store-bought. I stared at her text in mild panic. I could barely cook basic meals, let alone dessert. Does ice cream count as making dessert? I texted back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then absolutely not. Come over tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Emergency baking lesson. I refused to have my reputation tarnished by association. And just like that, my Tuesday acquired a new purpose. I found myself smiling at my phone like an idiot, already looking forward to whatever kitchen disaster awaited me under Elena's tutelage. It struck me then, as I sat in my quiet apartment, how dramatically my daily life had changed in just 1 week. From endless job rejections and Netflix binges to lawn mowing, dinner parties, job interviews, and now baking lessons, all because I'd noticed an older woman struggling with her lawnmower and decided to help. Sometimes, the smallest actions opened the most unexpected doors. And sometimes, the most important growth happened not in elaborate 5-year plans, but in the simple decision to show up, to offer help. To say yes to a dinner invitation from someone who was tired of eating alone. Tuesday afternoon found me standing on Elena's porch precisely at 4 p.m., feeling oddly nervous. Baking had never been on my list of skills to acquire. Microwave meals and takeout had sustained me through my tech career just fine. But the prospect of showing up empty-handed to Elena's dinner party was apparently motivation. Enough to venture into unknown culinary territory. Alina opened the door wearing a flour-dusted apron over a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in its usual practical bun. The house smelled of vanilla, and something citrusy that made my mouth water immediately. Right on time, she noted with approval. Good. Baking waits for no one. She gestured for me to follow her to the kitchen, which had been transformed into what looked like a small-scale professional bakery. Ingredients were lined up in precise measurements. Mixing bowls stood ready, and recipe cards were propped against the backsplash. This looks tense, I said, eyeing the setup with growing apprehension. Baking is chemistry, Alina replied matter-of-factly. Precision matters. Unlike cooking, where you can improvise, baking requires following the rules at least until you understand them well enough to break them intelligently. That sounds suspiciously like coding, I mused. Exactly. She pointed a wooden spoon at me triumphantly. That's why I think you'll take to it naturally. Both require attention to detail, following protocol, and understanding how components interact. Put that way, it did sound less intimidating. An Italian olive oil cake, she said. Simple but sophisticated. People expect chocolate or something flashy, but this will surprise them subtle, complex flavors that develop as you eat. Plus, she added with a wink, it's nearly impossible to mess up, which makes it perfect for beginners. For the next hour, Alina guided me through the process with the practiced patience of a former teacher. She explained each step not just as a direction to follow, but as a principle to understand why we zested the lemons directly over the sugar to capture the oils. Why we folded rather than stirred the wet ingredients into the dry. Why the specific olive oil mattered. I found myself completely absorbed in the process, asking questions and noting the similarities to my own field as Alina had predicted. The precision, the cause and effect relationships, the importance of timing. It really was like a particularly delicious form of coding. Now we wait, Alina said as we slid the cake into the oven. She set a timer and turned to me. Tea, or something stronger. I have a decent Prosecco in the fridge. Prosecco sounds great, I admitted. It's been a day. Good news or bad? She asked, retrieving the bottle. Neither, actually, just a lot. I accepted the glass she offered and followed her. To the living room, where we sat in comfortable armchairs facing a small fireplace. Diane called me this morning, Alina said, settling into her chair. She was quite impressed. I felt a flush of pride. She's hard to read, I wasn't sure. That's her superpower, Alina replied with a smile. But she said you were the first candidate who actually listened to their problems instead of just talking about your own skills. It's a real issue, I said, warming to the topic. Their portal is actively working against the students. It's the kind of design that makes people feel stupid when the system is what's actually failing. Alina nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. That's how many of my students felt about math. The system told them they were bad at it, when really they just needed different approaches. Different interfaces, you might say. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our drinks. Through the window, I could see Elaine's garden bathed in late afternoon light, the colors vivid against the darkening sky. Can I ask you something? Personal? I said suddenly. You can ask, she replied, a hint of caution in her voice. I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. I gathered my thoughts. After your husband died, how did you find your way forward? Her expression softened. Ah, that is personal. She looked into her glass for a long moment before continuing. Not well at first. The first year was a fog. I went through the motions, teaching, grocery shopping, basic existence, but I wasn't really living, just surviving. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. The second year was almost harder, she said. The shock had worn off and I had to face the reality that this was my life now, alone. After 30 years of partnership, she took a sip of her Prosecco. I was angry. At him for dying, at myself for being angry, at well-meaning friends who kept telling me to move on, as if grief follows a tidy schedule. What changed? I asked quietly. Gardening, she said simply. I had always enjoyed it, but after Richard died, it became essential. There's something about putting your hands in soil, about nurturing life that reconnects you to the world. She smiled faintly. My therapist would probably use words like grounding and mindfulness, but for me, it was just necessary. And it helped? Gradually. Not in a dramatic way, but steadily. Plants don't care if you're grieving. They need what they need: water, light, care. They force you into the present moment. She looked at me directly, but the real turning point came when I realized I was tired of being defined by his absence. I was a more than just Richard's widow. The timer in the kitchen chimed, saving me from having to formulate a response to her raw honesty. Moved back to the kitchen, where Alina showed me how to test the cake for doneness and then let it cool properly. The hardest part about baking, she said as we washed dishes, is patience. Everyone wants to cut into a cake the moment it comes out of the oven, but you have to wait. Let it set, let the flavors develop. Another life metaphor? I asked, with a small smile. Perhaps she conceded. Or perhaps I just don't want you to ruin a perfectly good cake with impatience. By the time the cake had cooled, been removed from its pan, and been dusted with powdered sugar according to Elena's exacting standards, it was nearly 7 p.m. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked casually. "Nothing fancy tonight, just pasta with garden vegetables." "I don't want to impose," I said automatically, though the thought of another meal alone in my apartment held little appeal. "Alex," she said, fixing me with a teacher's stare when I want to be alone. "I'll tell you, directly, no polite hints, no subtle signals. I meant what I said the first time. I'm tired of eating alone. Your company is welcome. Is that clear enough?" I couldn't help but laugh at her directness. Crystal clear. "And yes, I'd love to stay for dinner." "Good. You can make the salad. Surely you can manage not to ruin perfectly innocent vegetables." Over a simple but delicious meal of pasta primavera and salad, our conversation meandered through books, movies, neighborhood gossip, and eventually my own background. Delina was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions about my childhood, my decision to enter tech, and my dreams beyond just finding another job. "I always wanted to create something meaningful," I admitted, twirling pasta on my fork. "In college, I had this idea for educational software that would adapt to different learning styles: visual, auditory, kinesthetic. But then the job offers came with their signing bonuses and stock options, and I followed the money instead." "It's not too late," Alina said simply. "For what?" "For meaning. For creating something that matters to you." I shrugged, uncomfortable with her certainty. "Maybe, but first I need to pay rent." "Of course," she acknowledged. "Basic needs come first. But don't lose sight of that dream entirely. Tuck it away somewhere safe, and when the time is right, bring it out again." As I helped clean up after dinner, I found myself studying Elena, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the quiet strength in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes. She had faced the ultimate loss and rebuilt a life that held purpose and joy. It's not a replacement for what was gone, but something new and valuable. "What?" she asked, catching me watching her. "Just thinking," I said. "You're quite remarkable, you know." She waved away the compliment. "Hardly. I'm just older than you, which means I've had more practice at life's hard parts. You're doing fine, Alex, better than you think." When I finally left, cake carefully packaged to take home, it was with a strange mix of emotions: gratitude for her wisdom, admiration for her resilience, and something else I couldn't quite name. Something like inspiration, perhaps, or hope. Wednesday brought an unexpected email from Diane. "Position is yours if you want it. Start Monday. Details attached. Respond by EOD Thursday." I stared at my screen in disbelief, reading the email 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. The salary was indeed modest, as she'd warned, but the benefits were excellent. And the 24-hour weekly schedule would leave me time to pursue freelance work or even develop my own projects. Without overthinking it, I typed back, "I accept. Thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to Monday." Then I texted Alina, "I got the job. Starting Monday. Your friend works fast." Her reply came almost immediately. "Excellent. Diane never wastes time when she knows what she wants. This calls for celebration. Bring the cake on Friday." Friday evening arrived with a flutter of nervous anticipation in my stomach. I stood before my closet, realizing how long it had been since I'd socialized with anyone beyond Zoom interviews. In casual coffee shop conversations, Alina had said nothing fancy, but nice, which left a frustratingly wide range of interpretation. I finally settled on dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt, and a gray sport coat I hadn't worn since my last in-person interview. The olive oil cake sat in its container on my kitchen counter, looking deceptively simple but smelling divine. At 6:55 p.m., I walked across the street, cake in one hand, wine in the other, feeling oddly like a teenager heading to meet his date's parents for the first time. Which was ridiculous. This was just a dinner with my neighbor and her friends. People who were likely all Elena's age or older. The door opened before I could knock, revealing Elena in a simple but elegant burgundy dress, her hair down for the first time since I'd known her. It fell in soft waves to her shoulders, shot through with silver that caught the light. "You clean up well," she said approvingly, eyeing my outfit. "Come in. It's just a few people here already." I followed her into the living room, where 3 people stood chatting, drinks in hand. Elena made introductions. Margaret, the retired librarian Elena had warned me about, indeed dressed formally in a tailored pantsuit. David, a bearded man, in his 60s, who taught philosophy at the community college. And Claire, a stylish woman about Elena's age who owned a local bookstore. "So you're the lawnmower," Margaret said after shaking my hand, her tone making it clear she found my presence intriguing. Among other skills, Elena interjected smoothly, "Alex just accepted a position redesigning the college's online systems." "Thank God," David exclaimed with feeling. "That portal is the bane of every faculty member's existence." "So I've heard," I said with a smile. "I'm looking forward to the challenge." "And he bakes," Elena added, taking the cake from my hands. "Made this himself." I felt my face warm at the slight exaggeration. "Under very close supervision," I clarified. "Even better," Claire said warmly. "A man who can take direction."
Those are rare.
The doorbell rang, and Elena excused herself to welcome more guests. Left alone with her friends, I braced myself for awkward silence or polite but distant conversation. Instead, David immediately launched into a detailed rant about the college's online grade submission process, while Claire asked thoughtful questions about user interface design that revealed a genuine interest in the topic. By the time we moved to the dining room for dinner, I found myself relaxed and engaged, surprised by how easily conversation flowed across generational lines. Elena had assembled an eclectic group at people total, ranging in age from me at 32 to Margaret at 72, with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. The dinner itself was magnificent, a Mediterranean feast of grilled vegetables, roasted lamb, fresh bread, and at least 5 different salads, all arranged on platters down the center of the table. Wine flowed freely, and the conversation moved. From books to politics to travel, with good-natured disagreements that never turned contentious. I found myself seated between Claire and a man named Michael, a retired architect who had worked with Elena's husband. As we shared the olive oil cake and coffee for dessert, receiving compliments that I only partially deflected to Elena, "Richard would have liked you," he said quietly, nodding toward our hostess who was deep in conversation with Margaret. He always said Elena needed more young people in her life. Keeps the perspective fresh. "She's helped me more than I've helped her," I admitted. "I just mow her lawn." Just basically reoriented my entire career trajectory. Michael smiled knowingly. "That's Elena always teaching, whether you realize you're being taught or not." He swirled the last of his wine. "When Richard died, we all worried about her. She retreated so completely, declined invitations, stopped hosting these dinners that had been a monthly tradition for decades." I listened, sensing he was sharing something important. "This is the first dinner party she's hosted since he passed," he continued. 3 years. When she called to invite me, I nearly fell off my chair. He looked at me directly. "Whatever you're doing, lawn mowing or otherwise, it's been good for her. So thank you." Before I could respond, Elena called for everyone's attention from the head of the table. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, raising her glass, "to new beginnings, new friendships, and the courage to say yes when someone offers you dinner. Because they're tired of eating alone?" Eyes crinkled in knowing smiles around the table, and I felt a flush creep up my neck as I realized everyone there knew exactly how Elena and I had met. but there was no judgment in their expressions, only warmth and perhaps a touch of gentle amusement. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself helping Alina clear the table and load the dishwasher, falling into a comfortable rhythm we'd already established over our shared meals. "Your friends are wonderful," I said, rinsing plates before handing them to her. "I can see why you've kept them for so long." "Most of them were Richard's friends first, actually," she replied. "He was the social one, just fed everyone." She placed a glass in the dishwasher with precision. "Yes, they are wonderful. They carried me through the worst year of my life without ever making me feel pitied." "Real friendship," I observed. "Indeed, the kind that sees you at your worst and still shows up." She closed the dishwasher and turned to face me. "Thank you for tonight, Alex, for coming, for making an effort with my friends, for the cake." "I should be thanking you," I protested. "For the invitation, for the job connection, for the baking." "Lesson? I'm deeply in your debt." She shook her head firmly. "No debts between friends. It's just an ongoing exchange. That's how community works." There was that word again, community. Something I'd been sorely lacking in my life, I realized. My friends from college had scattered across the country. Work relationships had been surface level at best, and I'd been too busy climbing the career ladder to put down real roots. "Well, thank you anyway," I said simply. "It was the best evening I've had in a long time." "Mine too," she admitted with a small smile. "Now, take tomorrow's container of leftovers. And I'll see you for lawn duty on Saturday?" "Actually," I said, "I was thinking maybe we could start on that garden of mine this weekend, if the offer still stands." Her face brightened. "Absolutely. We'll need to assess the soil, map out the sun patterns, decide on plants appropriate. For beginners?" "Whoa," I laughed, holding up my hands. "I was thinking maybe a tomato plant and some basil to start." "Oh, Alex," she said with mock pity. "You have so much to learn. Gardening is never just anything. It's a gateway drug to full-blown horticulture addiction." "I trust you to keep me from going too far," I said, accepting the container of leftovers. She pressed into my hands. "On the contrary," she replied with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I intend to push you as far as you can go. By next summer, you'll be debating heirloom seed varieties and soil amendments, with the best of them." "Is that a threat or a promise?" I asked, pausing at her door. "Both," she said decisively. "Saturday, 9 a.m., your yard. They'll bring tools and starter plants." "Yes, ma'am," I replied with a mock salute. "I'll provide the coffee and manual labor." Walking back to my house under a sky full of stars, I felt a peculiar sense of rightness, as if pieces of my life that had been scattered were slowly being gathered and reassembled into something new. Not what I had planned or expected, but something potentially more meaningful. 3 months after that first lawn mowing session, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The part-time position at the community college had expanded into full-time work as the administration recognized the impact of our initial improvements to the student portal. My once barren backyard now flourished with vegetables, herbs, and flowers that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies. And most significantly, my friendship with Alina had deepened into something I treasured beyond measure. Our skill exchange had evolved into a natural rhythm of shared projects and meals. Every Tuesday evening, I helped Alina organize and digitize her late husband's architectural drawings and photographs, carefully scanning each one while she narrated the stories behind them. In return, every Saturday morning, she guided me through the increasingly complex world of gardening, teaching me about soil composition, seasonal planting cycles, and the delicate art of pruning. These sessions invariably extended into shared meals, often joined by an expanding circle of neighbors and friends who had been drawn into our orbit after that first garden building day. What had begun as a simple offer to mow a lawn had somehow catalyzed a quiet renaissance of community in our previously disconnected neighborhood. It was during one of our Tuesday digitizing sessions in late September that Alina first mentioned the community garden idea. It's the empty lot on Cedar Street. she said casually as I carefully placed another of Richard's hand-drawn building plans on the scanner. The one behind the old pharmacy. The city's been trying to figure out what to do with it for years. I responded absently, focused on ensuring the drawing was perfectly aligned. Always full of weeds and litter. Margaret sits on the neighborhood council, she continued. She mentioned they're open to community proposals. Deadline's next month. I looked up, recognizing the particular tone in her voice, the one that meant she had already formulated a plan and was simply waiting for the right moment to reveal it. "Alina," I said with suspicion, "what are you plotting?" She smiled, that mischievous glint in her eye that I'd come to both anticipate and slightly fear. Community garden. 20 plots minimum. A children's section. Maybe a small orchard along the north side, where it gets full sun. "That's ambitious," I said, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Alina never thought small. "The neighborhood needs it," she said matter-of-factly. "There are apartment dwellers with no garden space, seniors who can't maintain large yards anymore but still want to grow things, young families who could use fresh produce and outdoor education for their children." I nodded, already seeing the vision through her eyes. "And who exactly would be spearheading this massive undertaking?" she said with exaggerated innocence. I might have mentioned to Margaret that I know someone with excellent project management skills, technical expertise for creating a website and plot management system, and recent hands-on gardening experience. I groaned, but couldn't suppress a smile. "You volunteered me." "I volunteered us," she corrected. "I have the horticultural knowledge and community connections. You have the organizational skills and tech expertise. Together, we make one fully functional community garden director." "And when were you planning to consult me about this new career path?" "I'm consulting you now," she replied reasonably. "Besides, your enthusiasm for gardening has become rather obvious. You spent 2 hours last Saturday debating heirloom tomato varieties with Michael. You've gone full gardening." Nerd, Alex. Might as well put it to use for the greater good. She wasn't wrong. What had started as a neighborly project had indeed become a genuine passion. There was something profoundly satisfying about nurturing plants from seed to harvest, about the tangible results of careful tending and patience. The digital world I worked in was all virtual accomplishments. Gardening provided physical, literal fruits of labor. The proposal would need a budget, plans, a maintenance schedule, volunteer coordination. I mused, already mentally organizing the components. Elena's smile widened. She knew she had me. "Fine," I conceded. "But I'm not writing this proposal alone. And you're handling all plant-related questions." "My expertise still has serious limits," Deal, she said, extending her hand formally. "Partners, partners," I agreed, shaking her hand. "God help the neighborhood council. They have no idea what they're in for." Over the next 3 weeks, Elena's dining room transformed into proposal headquarters. Charts, diagrams, and plant lists covered every surface. Neighbors dropped by with suggestions, offers of support, and sometimes just to marvel at the scope of what we were planning. Michael created architectural renderings based on Richard's old design principles. Claire from the bookstore offered to maintain a free library box for gardening resources. David from the philosophy department volunteered to coordinate with the college for student service hours and educational programs. Even my parents, visiting from Michigan for the first time since I'd moved to Oregon, were impressed by the endeavor. "You've found your people," my mother observed quietly as we stood in Elena's kitchen. Watching through the window as Elena enthusiastically explained raised bed construction to my bewildered father in the backyard. "I have," I admitted. "Who I expected, but exactly who I needed." "She's remarkable," Mom said, nodding toward Elena. "The way she talks about you. It's like she's known you forever." "It feels that way sometimes," I agreed. "Hard to believe it's only been a few months." "Some connections don't need time," she replied thoughtfully. "They just need openness." On the night before the proposal deadline, Alina and I sat at her dining room table putting the final touches on what had become a 40-page document complete with budgets, timelines, volunteer commitments, and Michael's professional-grade renderings. "Do you think we've gone overboard?" I asked, eyeing the substantial proposal. "Absolutely," Elena replied without hesitation. "But that's how you show you're serious. Anyone can submit a 2-page idea. This shows we've thought through every aspect, anticipated objections, and have a real plan for success. I nodded, too, tired to argue with her logic. It was nearly midnight, and we'd been working for hours after my regular workday at the college. "Here," Alina said, pushing a mug of tea toward me. "Your eyes are crossing. Take a break." I accepted the tea gratefully and leaned back in my chair, stretching muscles stiff from hunching over my laptop. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, echoing the question I'd asked months earlier about her life after Richard. "Of course," she replied, settling into her own chair with her tea. "Are you happy with how things have turned out? With your life now?" She considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness, not rushing to a polite platitude. "Yes," she said finally. "Not the happiness I planned for or expected, but genuine happiness nonetheless." She looked at me directly. "I spent the first year after Richard died waiting for happiness to return, as if it were something external that had been temporarily misplaced. I eventually realized that's not how it works." "How does it work?" I asked, genuinely curious. About her perspective. "You don't find happiness," she said simply. "You build it, piece by piece, choice by choice. Some days, the construction goes well. Other days, you're just trying to keep the structure from collapsing. But it's always internal." "Work," I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. My own happiness had shifted dramatically over the past months, not because my external circumstances were perfect, but because my approach to those circumstances had fundamentally changed. "I was hiding," I admitted, "before I met you. Just going through the motions, waiting for my real life to resume once I got another tech job. As if everything in between was just filler, not actual living." "Many people do that," Alina said. "Treat whole chapters of their lives as just the space between real events. But life doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. It happens in the waiting rooms, in the garden beds, in the mundane Tuesday evenings." "In the lawn mowing," I added with a smile. "Exactly." She tapped the proposal on the table. "This project matters not just because of what it might become, but because of what it already is. People connecting, creating, caring about something beyond themselves." "When did you get so wise?" I teased. "Tuesday, June 17th, 1997, she replied promptly. "Approximately 3:42 p.m. I laughed. "That's specific, huh?" "Of course not," she said with a wink. "Wisdom accretes slowly, like soil building up over time. No dramatic transformation, just gradual accumulation through experience, reflection, and usually a healthy dose of failure." "Well, I hope this proposal isn't one of those failures," I said, returning to the document. "Let's finish this masterpiece so we can get some sleep." 2 weeks later, we received the news. The neighborhood council had unanimously approved our community garden proposal. Construction would begin in early spring. With a tentative opening date of May 1st, the email from Margaret arrived while I was at Elena's for our regular Saturday gardening session. I read it aloud to her as she knelt among her fall vegetables, harvesting the last of the season's bounty. "We did it," I exclaimed, feeling a surge of excitement and pride. They approved everything, the full budget, the design, even the educational programs. Lena sat back on her heels, a bunch of carrots in her gloved hands, and smiled, not her usual quick smile, but something deeper, more reflective. "We did," she agreed. "And now the real work begins." "Always the teacher," I teased. "Can't we just celebrate for 5 minutes before you remind us of the responsibility?" "Fine," she conceded, standing up and brushing soil from her knees. 5 minutes of celebration and practical planning. But our celebration stretched well beyond 5 minutes. That evening, we hosted an impromptu gathering for everyone who had contributed to the proposal. Elena's dining room, which had so recently been proposal headquarters, became party central, with neighbors bringing food, drinks, and increasingly elaborate ideas for the garden project. As I moved through the crowded room, refilling drinks and accepting congratulations, I caught sight of Alina deep in conversation with Mrs. Chen and her teenage son. She was animated. Part 4 continued as I moved through the crowded room. Refilling drinks and accepting congratulations, I caught sight of Alina deep in conversation with Mrs. Chen and her teenage son. She was animated, her hands sketching shapes. In the air, as she described something, probably the children's garden section, she was particularly passionate about. Mrs. Chen's son was actually taking notes, his expression serious and engaged. The scene struck me with unexpected force. This gathering of diverse neighbors who, just months ago, had barely acknowledged each other with a nod. Now they were in Elena's living room, sharing food and dreams for a communal space that would further strengthen these newly formed bonds. And at the center of it all was Elena, who had once told me she was tired of eating alone, but had never actually been content with solving just her own isolation. She had quietly, persistently created ripples of connection that were now expanding, beyond anything we could have anticipated. Later, as the party wound down and just a few guests remained, Michael pulled me aside. "You know," he said quietly, "I've known Elena for over 20 years. It's through Richard's career, their travels, and then through his illness and passing. I've never seen her quite like this." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Fully herself," he replied thoughtfully. "With Richard, she was part of a partnership, a strong one, but still, her identity was partly merged with his. After he died, she was defined by his absence. But now..." He gestured toward Elena, who was laughing at something David had said. "Now she's just Elena, complete, her own person." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. In the months I'd known her, I had witnessed her transformation from the widow across the street to a multifaceted woman with visions, skills, strong opinions, and an extraordinary capacity for building community. "She's done the same for you." "You know," Michael added, surprising me. "What do you mean?" "When you first came to her dinner party, you were cautious, or hesitant, like someone who wasn't sure of their place in the world." He smiled. "Now look at you, co-creator of a community garden. Central to this neighborhood renaissance, hosting people twice your age with perfect confidence, you've grown into yourself." I hadn't thought about it that way, but he was right. My friendship with Elena had changed me, not by making me different, but by helping me become more fully who I already was. As winter settled over our neighborhood, the community garden planning shifted into high gear. Elena and I established a formal committee, created a website where residents could sign up for plots, and organized a series of preparatory workshops on everything from basic gardening skills to composting techniques. My role at the college expanded to include teaching a course on user experience design, where I used the community garden website and management system as a real-world project for my students. Elena occasionally guest lectured, bringing her teaching experience and gardening expertise to help students understand the human factors behind digital interfaces. Our weekly skill exchange sessions continued, though they had evolved beyond the original arrangement. Now we worked side by side on garden plans, workshop materials, and community outreach, each contributing our strengths to a shared vision. One snowy evening in late January, as we sat by Elena's fireplace reviewing the spring planting schedule, she suddenly said, "I need to show you something." She disappeared into her office and returned with a worn leather journal. "Richard's garden journal," she explained, settling back into her chair. He documented everything: planting dates, varieties, successes, failures, 30 years of gardening wisdom. She handed it to me carefully, as if passing over something precious. "I think he would want it to inform the community garden."
Nice.
Knowledge shouldn't just sit on a shelf. I accepted the journal, understanding the significance of this gesture. This wasn't just practical information. It was a piece of Elena's past, a tangible connection to the life she had shared with Richard. That she was willing to incorporate it into our shared project spoke volumes about how she had integrated her past with her present. "We could digitize the most useful sections," I suggested, gently paging through the meticulous notes and hand-drawn garden layouts. "Create a resource library available to all the gardeners." "That's exactly what I was thinking," she said with evident pleasure. "We could call it the Richard Novak Memorial Garden Library." "Perfect," I agreed. A way to honor his legacy while helping others grow. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the fire crackling softly as snow fell outside the windows. These quiet moments had become as valuable to me as our more active collaboration spaces, where we didn't need to fill the air with words, where friendship existed in the peaceful shared presence. "You know," Elena said eventually, "when I first saw you struggling with that job search, I recognized something familiar." "What was that?" I asked. "The look of someone who had lost their sense of purpose," she replied. I had that same look. After Richard died, and again after I retired from teaching, as if the thing that had defined me was gone, and I wasn't sure what remained. I nodded, remembering that feeling all too well, the disorientation of having my professional identity suddenly stripped away, the uncertainty about my value without that label. "The garden helped me find my way back," she continued. "It's not because gardening itself was so important, but because it connected me to something larger than myself, to cycles of growth and renewal, to the community, to future harvests I might not personally see." "Is that why you're so invested in the community garden?" I asked. "As another way to connect to something larger?" "Partly," she acknowledged, "but also because I saw an opportunity to help others make that same connection. People need purpose, Alex. They need to feel that their efforts matter, that they're contributing to something meaningful. And growing food together certainly qualifies," I said, understanding her vision more deeply now. "Exactly. In a world where so much work feels abstract or temporary, there's profound satisfaction in planting a seed, tending it, and literally harvesting the fruits of your labor." She smiled. "Plus, nothing builds community quite like arguing over the proper way to stake tomatoes." I laughed, having witnessed several such passionate debates in our planning meetings. "Speaking of community building, I've been thinking about the opening ceremony for the garden. What if we made it a real celebration? Food, music, activities for kids. Really mark it as a significant moment for the neighborhood." Elena's eyes lit up. "I love that idea. We could have a plant exchange, cooking demonstrations using spring vegetables, maybe even garden-themed art projects for children." And just like that, we were off and running again, planning and dreaming, building something neither of us could have created alone. By the time I left that evening, we had drafted a full event plan for the garden opening, complete with volunteer assignments and a tentative schedule. Walking home through the gently falling snow, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 7 months. From unemployed and isolated to deeply embedded in community work that integrated my professional skills with newly discovered passions. From barely knowing my neighbors to being on a first-name basis with people up and down the street. From eating alone in front of Netflix to regular shared meals with an expanding circle of friends, all because Elena Novak had said those simple, brave words, "Stay for dinner. I'm tired of eating alone." The community garden opened on schedule on May 1st, a perfect spring day that seemed custom-ordered for the occasion. The once neglected lot had been transformed into a vibrant space with neat raised beds, graveled pathways, a small orchard of young fruit trees, and a children's garden, complete with sunflower house and sensory plants. Attended the opening ceremony not just from our immediate neighborhood, but from across the city. The local newspaper sent a reporter. The mayor gave a short speech. Children ran excitedly from activity to activity while their parents signed up for workshops and plot shares. Alina and I stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching with shared satisfaction as people explored the space we had helped create. "Not bad for a lawn mowing arrangement that got out of hand," I commented, nudging her gently with my elbow. "I had a feeling about you," she replied with a smile. "That day with the lawnmower? Something about the way you didn't hesitate to offer help." "I was just procrastinating on job applications," I admitted. "Perhaps," she allowed. "But you still showed up. That's rarer than you might think." Before I could respond, we were pulled back into the festivities, questions to answer, activities to supervise, introductions to make. The day passed in a blur of conversations and celebrations, and it was early evening before things finally quieted down. A small group of us, the core planning committee, stayed behind to clean up. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the newly established garden, Elena gathered everyone for a toast with sparkling cider. "To new growth," she said simply, raising her paper cup. "In gardens and in community. To new growth." We echoed, standing in a circle among the fresh plantings. Later, As Alina and I walked home together, tired but deeply satisfied, she said something that perfectly captured the journey we had shared. You know, Alex, we often think happiness comes from grand gestures and major life events, but I've found it's usually built from smaller moments, offering to help a neighbor, accepting an invitation to dinner, saying yes to something new, even when it's easier to say no. I nodded, understanding completely. It's about showing up, being present, seeing opportunities for connection, even in routine moments. Exactly, she agreed. Life is just a series of ordinary days. It's what we choose to do with those days that makes them extraordinary. We paused at the spot where our paths would diverge, she to her house, me to mine. Houses that now felt like integral parts of a neighborhood rather than isolated properties on the same street. Dinner on Tuesday? She asked. Our weekly tradition now firmly established. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. I'm trying that new pasta recipe you shared. Brave man, she said with a laugh. Let me know if you need emergency intervention. As I continued to my house, I thought about the path that had led me here, not just physically to this place, but to this moment in my life where I felt genuinely connected, purposeful, and yes, happy. Not the happiness I had once pursued through career advancement and financial stability, but something deeper and more sustainable. I had learned from Alina that true fulfillment comes not from what we acquire or achieve, but from what we nurture and share. That communities aren't found but built, one relationship at a time. That even in our most isolated moments, connection is often just one courageous invitation away. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most life-changing journeys begin with the simplest of steps, like offering to mow a neighbor's lawn on a summer afternoon when you have nothing better to do. The following Saturday, I was in my backyard tending to the thriving garden that had once been nothing but weeds and neglected soil. The tomatoes were already forming small green fruits. The herbs released their fragrance with every touch, and the flowers Elena had insisted on planting for the soul as well as the pollinators added splashes of color among the vegetables. I heard the familiar creak of my back gate and turned to see Alina entering with a small potted plant in her hands. Special delivery, she announced, cutting from my grandmother's rosemary bush. Over 60 years old now, passed through 3 generations. I thought your garden needed something with history. I accepted the pot carefully, understanding the significance of this gift. Hey, I'm honored. I'll try not to kill this piece of your family legacy. You won't, she said with confidence. You've become quite the gardener. Besides, rosemary's practically indestructible, like all the best relationships. As I found the perfect spot and began digging a hole for this new addition to my garden, I thought about roots, both the literal ones I was about to plant and the metaphorical ones I'd established in this community. Roots that provided nourishment, stability, and the foundation for future growth. There, I said, patting the soil around the newly transplanted rosemary. May it thrive for another 60 years? I have no doubt it will, Alina replied, her eyes crinkling with that familiar warmth. Wow. You know how to tend what matters now? And in that simple moment, sunlight filtering through leaves, soil under my fingernails, the scent of herbs in the air, and the presence of a dear friend who had become family, I felt the full circle of what had begun with a simple offer to mow a lawn. 2 people, no longer eating alone. 2 lives enriched by unexpected connection. 2 hearts no longer defined by absence, but by the presence they created together in a community reawakened to the power of paying attention. Reaching out and saying yes to the extraordinary potential hidden within ordinary days. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.